To be modern is not a fashion, it is a state. It is necessary to understand history and you understand that which is and that which will be.
We have with us today architect Madhav Joshi, the founder of an architectural and urban planning firm based in Pune called Architect Madhav Joshi and Associates. Architect Madhav Joshi graduated in architecture from BKPS College of Architecture, Pune. He did his post-graduation in urban planning from IIT Kharagpur and then went on to establish his firm in 1998. His firm is a hub of architectural creativity and designing projects that explore new frontiers of contextual modernism as a consciously adopted approach rather than a style.
So I'm actually pleased to put the emblem of College of Architecture, which is a deemed university now. You are blessed with a wonderful campus. I mean, at one time, you can consider this as beginning of my presentation anyway. It's not going to be very formal, loaded with a lot of terms and terminologies of architecture. But I'm just trying to connect with students in whichever way I can. So when I wanted to do architecture, in fact, my father, who was a graduate of Sjjcoa University, Baroda, he introduced me to the word architecture, and he introduced me the what that field is all about. And I got instantly sort of fascinated by that when I was in 10th and wanted to join. Of course, JJ was one of my one of the two institutes in the region was JJ and BKPS then. And of course, I tried at both the places. But in the interview at the JJ, I don't remember who was there. But some of the terminologies I was not familiar with, such as what is RCC and what is eave and what is a rafter and things, because there's some questions were asked and probably I failed because of that. But nonetheless, I was lucky to get admission at BKPS, and I carried on my quest to study architecture there. So, see, I'll tell you the overview of this presentation is going to be why I call it as a design dialect is although overall learning and upbringing is of looking at good examples of modern architecture, contemporary architecture. But of course, I mean, you grew up in an environment which is traditional and it has got a history. And that also has influences on your thought process, because that's the first built environment that you have experienced before even you came to know a term called architecture as a child and as you grow. So those influences are far deep, and that's true with everybody because all of us come from various backgrounds, various geographies, various cultures, and every culture has unique offering in terms of its built environment as well as the way the lives are lived in those environments. So those influences also sort of get mixed with your formal education of architecture and your exposure to the world as you travel. So all that comes together. So I'm just trying to capture that as well. And when it comes to exercising those learnings to a particular project within a urban, like why dialect? Because the way I look at it, even if we are speaking Marathi, for example, region to region, you will find some nuances of the language which change, and then there is the phonetics is different. Phonetics, then you have some certain terminologies are different. Certain, I mean, what we call in Hindi, some laheja is different. So every dialect has a different set of words for the similar meanings. but it conveys the message nonetheless, which is the same across all the variations. So likewise, architecture also has to respond to its context and the region, and for which it is being sort of created uh, by a language of its own, which can communicate and create an environment which is more conducive and more appropriate for the function for which it is going to be built. So within a city, even if you are talking about a city as a geography, you will have various districts which are predominantly commercial areas, maybe residential areas, and the way you would intervene in those areas would be different. You'll have to have a different dialect, very subtle changes. The materiality could be different, or looking back into all those examples, we realize there are certain inspirations that this is a image from Mandu. There's a place called Nilkant, and that's the famous spiral motif that is popularly used in various places, organizations. We also were tempted to adopt that, which is that Bindu, as it's called, or a spiral. So this we chose as our office sort of a logo because it connects us to the space and not just a diagram which is on the floor. And that space is very dynamic, the way the water comes, the way it sort of interacts with the surroundings. So it's very interesting location that we connect to. And so a small element like that, like you can see that Bindu or the spiral, which is actually an overflow of the water. So wonderful play of water at different stages and different textures of surfaces. So that was the reason we sort of, thought we can still remain connected with our past and history and get inspired continuously in order to, explore our own journey. I would like to quote here Corbusier's words: "To be modern is not a fashion; it is a state. It is necessary to understand history, and he understands that which is and that which will be." So, taking inspiration from that saying, I'm just going to start with some of our explorations. So, how this evolution of design dialect happens, the way we have interpreted, and this is through our own projects. And there are about 6 parameters I have chosen. There could be many, and there are many, but just to make it more simplistic and more graphically communicable, we thought we can just talk about these 6 parameters. And the way process begins is with inspirations and learnings that as a group of architects or as a studio, as an individuals in the studio has, and the way they bring their sort of experiences together on the table gives birth to an idea, which normally we call as a concept, but it's an idea which sort of triggers the whole process. Then, of course, there are some tangibles such as site context, and when we are actually indulging ourselves into exploration of nitty-gritties of building requirement, design program, clients' requirements, then contextual realities, building bylaws and whatnot. So there are a whole set of parameters, not only the physical context, but then there's a process which actually goes through a very simplistically put here is like there are 3 aspects that we ultimately deal with is traversing, how the build happens with this juxtaposed as unbuilt. So built and unbuilt is another important conscious understanding that we want to deploy in each of our exercise. And ultimately, it has to have some material existence. There has to be, it has to be a thing ultimately. It has to have a body. And the material interface, which materials are appropriate for what purpose, uh, becomes the point of exploration, and how they sort of are assimilated together, how they connect with each other is also an interesting process through which the design is manifested as finally we see it. So I'm just going back to all these 6 points. My suggestion to all of you is that you'll have to keep track of certain so that there are examples which are repetitive, but there are examples used in all these aspects, and finally they come together. And at the end of it, I'm going explain. So, like you've been traveling, you've been reading, you've been looking at other people's work, you've been sort of doing your own things. So there, it is all sort of triggered by inspirations and learnings that everybody has. Likewise, I would like to share some of mine. So I come from a place called Vai. This is the first temple town on River Krishna, and that's my birthplace. And lot of my early days in childhood uh, sort of were spent in this town, although I was staying in some other places also in the Satara district. So but why left a very profound impact on my mind. And as I started understanding and learning architecture, I looked back on things which used to sort of fascinate me. For example, you can see the way the materials are stacked up on each other, because the harder and the more stronger material can be seen at the bottom. Then the bricks and the wood, more fragile materials on the top. Like, and there are many more learnings in that. You can look at the uh, wooden system of doors and windows in the first floor, which actually is very modular and can be assembled off-site and brought on the site and again reassembled. So there are various ways we can sort of look at these buildings and learn. So I'll just go through some of them, or for that matter, crafts and arts of the region. And that's so much of is there to learn from all these ghats on the River Krishna. Now, I was fascinated how this observation and this understanding becomes a good reference point when I'm doing a completely modern building in an urban context. Like, for example, as we go ahead, I'll sort of ask you, I'll sort of suggest you to recollect this particular image where you can see there's a stone which is more than 10 to 12 feet high, and then actually the habitable spaces start. The idea behind this is that this river gets flooded, and when the floods come, they should not damage your house. They should, and that's why the stronger material is the one which actually protects the house from those floods. So all this flood or the threats or the danger which is on the riverside is sort of mitigated with use of appropriate material. And as you go up, you sort of use lighter and lighter materials. So it has got a very definite sense of purpose, and that gives a character to it itself, and which is more or less same in most of the areas along the riverfront. And temples themselves are all in stone because they get submerged during heavy floods, and that's how the material is there. Whereas the shikharas are all in brick and mortar, lime mortar, whatever, and those are the areas which rarely get under water. I haven't seen them go underwater much in my presence there. Some of you must have visited. This is a famous Dhola Ganpati ghat in Ganpati Ari. This is like a public space. I mean, there is another set of there's another like a presentation that I have, where I talk about how public spaces are important and how they are created before anything is built around them. So this is very much part of the urban life in Y. And there are festivities which has got a yearly calendar. You can see some pandals. So that's very temporary use. There are temporal activities, and the space is very flexible to accommodate a lot of activities. So these are the learnings actually. I mean, these are the events you connect culturally, but as an architect, planner, urban designer, you have so much to sort of learn from these possibilities. This is a famous Medavli Ghat nearby. And you just name every object in the frame. I mean, there are details in the stone sizes, there are details the way they connect, the size of the opening, and there are, the gonada for the lamp. There are so many things as you sort of, start observing, you'll start accumulating all those wonderful images. Then you travel, this is Badami, and then you're tempted to do your own documentation by way of sketching. Photography is one way, but doing sketching sort of takes you to another level, because you try to connect and get challenged basically by what was created earlier. So mere sketching is also difficult, leave alone doing it again. But that actually leaves you inspired when you leave that place, and you come back with a greater challenges in your mind to create something better nonetheless. Now these are various. This is a temple nearby at Dome. This is Le Corbusier's Mill I am Ahmedabad. This is Ramshaw. You must have seen wonderful images of it. So it was a treat to be there and sit down and do that, pay that respect by doing a couple of sketches. So it's a way of, paying tribute to the masters by, trying to do at least a sketch or two whenever you travel. This is in Bijapur. This is Rashmanch in West Bengal. Well, this is Mahabalipuram, Padmanabhapuram Palace. This is the Notre Dame in Paris before, long back. This was 2001, before the roof was sort of caught fire recently. And this, of course, this is like, this is everybody's dream to, go travel, see these places, these wonderful buildings once in lifetime. And, when you go there, you can't come back without a sketch. And when you sit there and start drawing, you know how wonderfully it was, crafted and designed. This is Salk Institute by Khan. This is Kimball Art Museum. This is Carpenter Center. So likewise, you travel, you tend to sketch, and then you, consolidate your notions about those buildings which you have seen mostly in magazines and books. But seeing them and experiencing the spaces sort of, corrects all those notions in terms of its space, its scale. And if you're able to sketch it down to more or less reasonable proportions, then it's a very happy conclusion to that entire quest of exploration. So with this learnings, when you start with designing certain projects, you're always in search of a concept, which I'm referring here as a birth of an idea. So for example, there was one project which is a weekend house, which was in the outskirts of Pune, and wonderful surroundings. And for a weekend house, why you go there in the first place, why that is to be built, because you want to connect with the nature. And we actually have a interesting process in our studio when we try to find at the end of all this design, sort of beginning of the design discussion, we try to capture what we want to do in a one-liner as far as possible. So here, you'll find all these one-liners for every project, which in a way talk about the USP of that project. So here you want to do something like this, capturing the horizon, because when you go out the city bounds, uh, you want to see more of the sky and surroundings rather than the buildings around. Of course, buildings are very few there, but sky from the city living is missed out on a daily basis. I mean, when you look at from the window, you hardly would see one-fourth or one-third of the picture frame as the sky. Rest of it is buildings or the neighbors' trees or whatever. But here we thought it's a good idea to capture sky and capture the drama that happens in the sky. Maybe moon, maybe rain, maybe shine, or clouds, or the birds, whatever it is. It will always have something to offer in every season. So that was the idea, and that would be a wonderful way to kickstart a thought process for a weekend house. Or for that matter, some other project where we are going to deal with extreme difficult slopes, and it was going to be a place for youth. And we thought this would be a wonderful way to sort of capture that idea, which is cascading energies. So, and that's manifested in the design. Or for that matter, when you are asked to design a campus in a pristine setting, which otherwise does not have a very sort of glamorous views, or seafront, or any dynamic views, but a simple hills and undulated terrain around it. That's all you have to respond to, and that also has a lot to offer to you. But the important realization is that you're going to intervene into that pristine natural setting. So you start thinking that instead of looking at your building as some object which can be which can stand out, you want to sort of look at your architecture, which could be an object in the landscape itself. Ultimately, you want to intervene and give back to nature. So that was the notion that one started with one of the projects. Or for that matter, if you are doing something in a larger campus, a set of buildings, there we thought we are working within a larger campus, and we actually want to create a precinct within that campus. So a campus within a campus, or a precinct within a campus, was the tagline for one institutional project. Now, all these projects are going to be referred repetitively for various parameters that I'm going to talk about. So you can sort of connect with these diagrams as you move on, and try to sort of assimilate together in your mind. So this is a housing project where, of course, we are talking about community clusters and how those could be formed together, and how there could be common spaces where kids and people of various ages, can experience togetherness and being experience of staying in a community. So that is a very fundamental thought that you want to bring into your design. So that is what was documented right at the beginning. So it's a community cluster that we'll be looking at. When you are intervening in an urban high density scenario, it's like, it's a gorge in a mountain areas where, there's a lone river at the foot of the hills, so the foot of the two cliffs, and that's where the life flows. And therefore we thought, this could be a wonderful sort of reference which can be sort of, explored through design. Like this. I mean, in urban context, there are residential towers, and what happens at the bottom of it is the public areas, or the podium, which can bring public life together. So this is the gorge that we are looking at, and these are the high sort of edges of the cliff. Or a simple thing like how you arrive at a place is also defines the entire experience, because that is where the experience begins. So any building for that matter, arrival is very important. But here we wanted to highlight it because we are dealing with a campus which had buildings of two different purposes. One is a hotel building and the next one is a office building, and both of them need to have wanted to have their own identity as for their arrival. So delineating the arrival was the guiding line when we started, organizing the entire campus. Or creating urban workplace. This is a very common dilemma. Of course, nowadays we can see the skyline of Bombay is changing rapidly, and there are taller and taller buildings coming up. But there was a time when we started designing on a particular project, which was a large mixed-use development on 12.5 acres, whether to go up high-rise or whether to go horizontal. That was the question that we were asking to ourselves. On the left side is the hotel building, so it just indicated proportionately in terms of its building bulk compared to what is going to be there as office space. So and then what choices we exercised and why we did what we did is represented in this diagram. So we wanted to sort of if you look, just focus your eye on the hotel building. This is what happens. The hotel would not change much, but the office buildings could have. So we wanted to give office areas also equal importance as that of hotel, but we didn't want them to dominate the entire proposition. And to bring the entire space to a more humane scale where people can relate to its surroundings, instead of intimidating them by exposing them to taller buildings. But certain situations do not allow you to exercise that choice, because this was done at the time where Pune did not have regulation for more than 60-meter or 65-meter tall buildings. But now you can respond differently. Or for that matter, when you are dealing with a larger urban design exercise, which is creating a city center for Pimpri-Chinchwad, this was the sort of idea that we put on paper first, creating public realm. That is most important. And then because that is going to be the destination, being a city center. So if you look at all these birth of an idea diagrams or the concept diagrams, they come together as varied as these ones. First one is a retreat. Second one is another a small backpackers hostel. Third is an institute campus. And this is their physical manifestation. We'll be looking at them more in details. This is present within the campus. This is community cluster with low-rise residential apartments. This is the gorge, high-rise, high-end residential project. This is delineating arrival, the hotel building and office building. This is urban workplace, is a mixed-use development, and this is a city center where you want to create.
Excuse me, sir. I don't think we can hear you. Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Anaya, wait for a minute. Maybe he has some connectivity issue. Hello, sir. Can you hear me? Anaya, wait for a minute. Maybe he.
Hello?
Yes, sir. You're
Yes.
audible now.
Can you?
Hello? Yes, sir. You're audible. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't realize when I got disconnected, but let me.
Yes, sir. You're audible. Yes, sir.
Can you see my screen still?
I didn't realize when I
No,
got.
sir.
Okay, let me. So where was my
Context.
presentation?
Right. Context.
Can you see?
Yes, sir.
Can you see
So
my
we
screen
cannot see
now?
the screen.
Okay, one sec. Let me.
So we can see your screen, but not your presentation.
No issues. Okay, now?
Now we can see.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I think I'll have to go back.
So we couldn't hear you after site context.
Right. So you haven't, I mean, did you see this?
Yes, we did. That was the slide that it stopped. The audio stopped.
Okay, and this was the last slide of that particular chapter. Can you hear now? I mean,
Yes, sir, we can. Yes.
so basically, when I was talking about the site context, these are the scales that we've been dealing with. And this is, mind you, it's all in the region of Pune. And there are different geographical districts where the contexts are different, the projects are different, and you had to sort of tweak your language of modernity or contemporary architecture to sort of respond to those interventions. And that's how, although we would consider our practice as mostly driven by a modernist thought process, these are the variations in that vocabulary, which actually is sort of, generated out of the contextual responses in that sense. So taking this idea ahead, what happens is that traversing within a building or within a campus, how you move within a building is very important. Or essentially, that is the diagram that we are actually exploring as a beginning of the design process. And that is the key to some of the organization of certain spaces. It's essentially two things. One is the traversing, and second one is the juxtaposing the built versus the unbuilt, which I'll be definitely talking about in the next chapter, so to say. So this is again referring back to the weekend house that I started mentioning, where the capturing the horizon was the tagline. So that is the tagline that you can sort of relate it with all the diagrams previously seen. Or for that matter, cascading energy. This is the way the traversing movement happens. So this is a figure ground which actually captures the traversing pattern in each of these projects. Or in the campus, the residential school campus, where we were talking about objects in the landscape, because the objects are actually scattered as per the terrain available, and you connect them with a very deliberate response to the ground characteristics and the movement pattern which you want to induce, which will bring a certain informality, as if you are traversing through a small village or a hamlet. So these are conscious attempts to organize the spaces with these thought processes. So traversing is another key element in that process. Or for that matter, present within the campus, when you are dealing with existing campus, there are surrounding roads you want to bring people from the vehicular movement, or traversing through, which has got a universal accessibility for the pedestrians, which are going to come from various directions of the campus. Or community cluster, which need to be connected through and through. And this is how the diagram sort of, emerges. The guards that we talked about, the space which is within the towers is going to be your flowing. It's like a river, a stream flowing there with a lot of activity and interaction spaces. Or how you want to delineate the arrivals by putting these walls which actually define zones of arrivals, basically. Or that large urban workplace where the linear arrangement of the masses define overall connectivity pattern. Or for that matter, the city center is more radial because the site was such, and you want to have one major arrival area, but of course connect to various other points. And there are multiple drop-off areas, being a large 35-acre site. So finally, you want to bring people at one particular node from where the distribution within the building can happen. So it is all about organizing the man and material movement, vehicular and pedestrian movement, but there has to be a definite pattern and thought process behind it. And we are just trying to capture that more graphically here. So when you look at it collectively, this is how the traversing patterns look for various projects. And this is a very important aspect, the built and the unbuilt. Actually, I always believe that the unbuilt defines the built. And we can talk about it a little more as we go ahead. But here, what is built is the dark portion. What is unbuilt is largely yellow or gray. So these objects are actually experienced and seen from the unbuilt areas. And the unbuilt areas are also, they are not accidents. There are conscious attempts to create leave that unbuilt area, which also accommodates activities which are outdoor. And that's true in all the projects, like maybe in a school campus or on that backpackers hostel campus or the institute, how people, these are the work areas and how they sort of, are connected and what happens in between, or how the traversing happens, or for that matter, in the housing areas. So each of these projects has a definite notion about the built and the unbuilt. For example, if you look at this large space, the large podium space that you can see here is a central organizer of the entire place. If you see in that key diagram, this is that space. It's a large 4-acre podium area, which is a landscape garden, which organizes all these buildings around it. These are the 2 office blocks and the hotel block. But this is a common central place which sort of defines the entire organization. So when I say the unbuilt defines the built, that there's a conscious call to keep certain area unbuilt, or typically, house around a courtyard. The idea of, keeping a courtyard is fundamental. And then there are various possibilities around it. Or for that matter, in a city place, to create open space, for example, for people within the building blocks is important. That's a conscious effort. And around that, the built is sort of defined. These are the traversing routes as you saw earlier, but this also gives clarity where the building blocks are to happen. And if you put together, this comes together as an interesting diagram of possibilities. And on the built and the unbuilt, I always look at historical examples also. Many piazzas in European cultures, those were like conscious decisions to keep those as piazzas around which the built happened. And the piazzas or the open spaces or the public spaces remain, be it a temple precinct or be an urban precinct or ghats. To keep that area as a public place or open space is fundamental design decision around which the built keeps on transforming over centuries, over generations. So the thought of not building something is equally a designed and conscious thought. And that is something also happens in our mind subconsciously or consciously. But that's one of the keys to organizing space, as we saw the traversing also does. And finally, giving manifestation to the built, looking at different materiality. Although every project is not defined by its materiality, but finally the identity is given to it by its external look as well. But if you just remove the material aspect of it, essentially what is sort of influencing your mind is the built form more than the material, but more materials also sort of enhance it to next level. So we realize that we've been dealing with a range of materials, starting from handcrafted stone masonries to all this industrial elements, or this more modern interpretation of shutter finish concrete or metal, or a good old plastered, rough textured buildings. But what matters is the way we look at the fenestration, the way we look at the interface of different materials coming together, how the shadows play an important role in the whole juxtaposition of the projections and the recessed elements. Or for that matter, different materials like water or maybe landscaping, because landscaping need a very neutral backdrop, and they can do rest of the drama. Or the materials of new age, which have arrived on the block, and then we have to respond and use them very carefully as well. So just to summarize, this is what we've been looking at through the examples. And all these colored images is what we are going to talk about in detail as we proceed further on this presentation. So the first one is capturing the horizon. It's a weekend house. And it's very interesting to note that this is my third-year sketch of a larger project, which was we are asked to design a city garden, a city park, and this was the entrance gate to that city park. And there was a small idea about this. There are many other objects which were designed in that project exercise, but this one was something which actually captured my imaginations as I was looking at this project at hand when we started practicing. So this entrance gate has simple load-bearing walls. You can see they are juxtaposed in two opposite sort of angles. One actually, as you look at it from below to up, from the left-hand side you look at a larger picture of the garden, whereas from the right-hand side you will focus onto certain object into the garden. Now imagine a kid approaching a park like this, and they would have a choice of whether to go from this or that, and they would have a picture frame of a same destination with a completely two frames, and that's where they can sort of trigger interest before they sort of rush into that area. And these are the small things which work on a human mind that architects are capable of sort of introducing. And that experience of going to that destination becomes that much more interesting right at the arrival. So this idea we thought can be sort of developed further when we wanted to respond to this program, and we wanted to sort of increase the sky space more, and that angle which you saw earlier would offer, like for example, this angle. Can you see? So, and plan also. So we thought this could be, because there was a view all around, and from every room, probably you could have a wonderful view. So the diagram sort of came about as such to capture all what is around that site. And this was the first sort of a sketch looking at the site from outside the site. That's another way of looking at project at hand. Normally we look at the site in itself. We study extensively or what are the contours of the site. We study extensively what program is talking about the site, but very rarely we see the site from outside. So this is where we thought it's a wonderful idea in a project like this to look at the site from outside and see how best it can one can respond to. Give me a second. Yeah. So this was the site which was comparatively at a higher position compared to the rest of the farmland. And we thought this is best location because being at the top, the topsoil has already eroded and it's not good for cultivation as such. And it would also command a better view into the surroundings. And that's how we selected to position the house at that particular location. So this is how that diagram is sort of shows. I mean, there's a gradual slope ending into a small valley, kind of a, it's not a valley, it's a swell where is a seasonal flow of water is seen. But otherwise, there is no obstruction of any objects, and you can see till the horizon. And that's what you want to capture in the picture frame. And this is how the diagram actually emerged. There's one slide missing, I guess, which talks about how that process came about, but okay. Yeah, it's there. So starting from the initial sketches on the side, slowly you start, try to make it more and more rational. The geometry of the plan and the volumes is held by a helical pattern, which establishes a rhythm between the independent moving lines. One wall of each space stretches longer, ensuring visual privacy between the spaces and added to the visual dynamism of the masses. Existing trees were marked and spaces were arranged to fit in snugly in the landscape without failing of any of existing trees or plants. So what happens is that there are localized sort of impediments which we have to respond very cleverly and accommodate them, such as trees. And having a wonderful tree, fully grown tree, is a blessing for any site. I mean, so we should think about how we can work around it and try to make it part of your idea. Likewise, the diagram evolved, and then you start in the search of a geometry, you start putting some angles and give some definition to the whole arrangement, and that's how the plan emerges. So it's a simple house with one living room or a lounge, which has got a pantry or small kitchenette supporting to it, and there are these two bedrooms, which has got attached toilet. All of them have a view outside. And then this is the traversing line you can see here, which sort of connects all those spaces. So this is where you arrive, and this is the veranda, and then this is actually a company guest house also. People, so these are like separately connected, but it's more of an outdoor experience. And there's a small courtyard which is hidden from the entrance. But finally, when you arrive, so these are the low height spaces. All these are like low height spaces, arrival spaces. And when you arrive, this is where you sort of suddenly exposed to that large view. Each of these rooms, like that. In fact, we did not do the formal section elevation drawings or these drawings that you see now while we were designing. The entire design was sort of worked upon with help of a number of models of different scales. And this was one of our early projects where we wanted to explore certain geometries of build form in response to the site. And construction point of view, the load-bearing walls, they are purely corbelling based walls. So this is not a cladding; these are load-bearing walls, and they are corbelled out to achieve that profile. And that profile is created because the views on the west side and the southwest side, which is the most severe side in terms of its elements, which are coming onto it, like rain and the sun, and those projection actually help you to sort of protect that living spaces from that. The kitchen area, and then some of the elements within the building. The bedrooms. It's a very interesting sort of take on this, like a staircase or staircase railing. Very often we forget that it is first seen from below, because when you approach, you look up, and what you see is the underside of a railing or the staircase of it. So it's a very important element to sort of give attention to. So this is the final view of that as seen from outside. Moving on to the next project, we are talking about the cascading energies, which is the backpacker seen on the picturesque slopes of hill station, that is Pajgani. Now, this project is designed by my daughter, Anubha. She recently received a JK Cement Award for this project. And how the young mind sort of, contributes in the thought process and the aspirations of the similar generation end user is wonderfully sort of represented in this exercise. Although there are a lot of site-based challenges, and she was taking lead in getting this executed as well. So but there are a lot of discussions that we had in the studio, which are very interesting. She being an avid tracker in her young ages, uh, younger days, uh, she had certain impressions about the nature and some of the learnings. For example, you can see how human intervention has happened over the hills, where they want to convert that hill slope uh, usable, cultivable. And these small terraces, which are created by human interventions, not intervened by heavy equipment. These are very traditional techniques of, grading the hill slopes in order to create cultivable areas for paddies, and small retaining walls or bund walls using local materials. But the idea, geometrically speaking, the idea is to how that slope can be sort of negotiated or tackled with help of creating small terraces. And this is how even hill towns you will see. Uh, all the hill towns will have buildings with a smaller footprint. Or for that matter, how the cattle or the livestock traverses on a hill slope. They would never sort of negotiate it directly perpendicular to the slope. And there are these, nature is also sort of giving these patterns, which is a natural phenomena of angle of repose of soil to make it more stable. And these formations happen naturally, and they are a very useful ways to negotiate the hill, and which is very obvious from the picture itself. And we would also want to climb this hill not straight on, but taking one of these oblique routes which are there. And that's how even the ghats happen. The ghats are meandering because you are actually trying to negotiate that slope gradually in order to achieve that gradient. And that movement pattern or the traversing pattern actually can be captured with that reality. This is more evident here as well. Now, these are the observations all of us can do. We can document, and you can, interpret it in a different way when you are doing landscaping. All these examples from the nature are so wonderful and can be adopted. And these are very, obvious ways you can respond without having to intervene with a lot of heavy, elements. And this is an interesting take that we quite often, discuss in the studio. Like, these are meerkats. They are very inquisitive creatures. They are always concerned about their security in the wild. And this is a family of meerkats which are like, consciously, looking towards potential threats around them, and they are looking beyond their habitat and looking far at a distance to check if any threats are coming their ways. Or not only that, they are very conscious about what's happening around, and they're just a very good observant, and you can see everybody is looking around in a very inquisitive manner, much like the way this habitat emerged. So all these container units, these are upcycled container units, which are sort of arranged on a hill slope, but they don't want to miss out, and they want to always capture what's happening in the valley, where there is a wonderful view from there of this Dome Dam and hills around Pachgani. So every season you will have wonderful views, cloudscapes, birds flying at a high level or even below. So there is something or some activity of nature is always happening, and you want to be kind of inquisitive and be focused onto that area, and that's the whole purpose of going there and unwinding yourself. Now, if you look at the footprint, it's very small footprint, very convenient to negotiate those slopes. Some of the sketches. And these are the spaces. Now, these are early photographs. Now, these areas are sort of flowing with a lot of green. And there are some existing trees that we could sort of preserve and accommodate. And these are the spaces, this particular space that you're looking at is a community space, which is a deliberately created unbuilt space from where you can experience this entire project. For that matter, the views that you can enjoy. You can notice the views beyond the containers. There's a valley beyond and hills, and look at the cloudscape. And that's the drama that you want to capture while you're there, and you want to be part of it as well. This is a completely new set of materials, and therefore a completely fresh approach in terms of its assimilation, and the detailing had to happen. So as a design studio, we had to have our own language, our own vocabulary, or our own dialect to deal with this material and to create an expression of architecture which can be sort of very interesting to experience. So what you see below is a green box is the dormitory, and above that is private rooms. And I'm sure most of you must be aware of this project, and many of you must have been there as well. Now, coming to objects in the landscape, which is the heritage residential school. Now, when we designed this project, first thing we did after looking at the site from within, we also looked at the site from outside the site. And this is the first picture talks about how the site looked like before anything was built on it. So we selected the portion which was on the left-hand side and which was largely uninterrupted or unintervened by any human activity of grading or leveling. You can see some of these areas were like terraced, but we, out of that entire land holding, we asked client to give us the most difficult area, which was not leveled at all, and maintain it that way because we wanted to respond to that reality of nature. And from the side, you can see it's all barren surroundings, except few hills at a distance that one could notice. So there was no view, a grand view as a starting point. But when we started traversing around the site and into the immediate context, we realized, I mean, there are these small hills and hillocks which one is surrounded by. And you can actually trace the sort of character of those landforms, which itself is very interesting. And for a human scale, they're quite big. Actually, when you are looking at these hills, I mean, they are at least 50 feet tall when you are standing in a lowest part. So they do matter to human scale. If I mean, not that you have to have always a view of a mountain, although we had one odd hill which had a very peculiar characteristic, which also we sort of noticed. And you can see this form and these forms. So we thought this is a wonderful way to begin, because ultimately we wanted to design objects in the landscape, and we wanted to design and sort of give back to the nature ultimately. So we wanted nature to take over the architecture, and you don't want to sort of stand out when you are intervening in a setting like this. And that was a very conscious decision you take at the beginning of the project. And this is the first response to that. This was going to be an environment for young minds, children of school starting from 4th standard to 10th standard. So we thought the scale really matters, and you don't want to have a very typical institutional or a school building, which could be a very sort of, very institutional in the sense of its scale or very intimidating. We wanted something which is very humane, very humble, and very comforting, because most of these kids were coming, leaving behind their parents, and this should be their home away from home. And the scale really matters to comfort them in that sense. And not everyone comes from a very comfortable background. They have some disturbed backgrounds also, and there are various reasons why parents want to keep students in a boarding school as well. So there are many psychological aspects one needs to understand. If and some way you can sort of help them, make stay more comfortably. That's what your responsibility is an architect. Now, when we are looking at various building requirements, the overall building requirement was to accommodate about 200 to 250 kids. It's a small school. It's a CBSE program, but they wanted to have a 1:25 ratio, teacher to student ratio. And it was a very compact scale of the campus that way. But as a small unit of the campus, you can see on the left-hand side is the arrangement of 4 dormitories, which are very orthogonal, very rectangle. But the way they were positioned together was very tight-knit space in between them. So if you can just look at the red area as it comes out from there. So it was a space which was compressed, and it wants to sort of, go out, that energy sort of flowing between the crevices of those 2 blocks. And that form itself is captured into the build form. And the oblique movement was deliberately induced so that the sort of regimentality of orthogonal geometry is dismantled. And we took help of the grading of the natural contours in order to sort of create an interesting traversing pattern for this. And that's how you can see the larger diagram on the right-hand side. That's how the entire, this is the first phase of the entire campus. And this is how finally it came out. And you can see how it responds to the hills, the roof form, which is very important. If I just go back, and just to substantiate what I was talking earlier, is the form that matters more than the materials actually. And we initially had thought of some plastered buildings with some pastel colors, earthen colors. But eventually the management thought it could be very difficult to maintain if kids are going to play ball games there, and there would be a lot of patches of mud on the wall, which to me was quite okay to have. That could tell some story, and it could bring some interesting character to that place. But they thought it could be very difficult to maintain, so we had to sort of translate that materiality to locally available stone eventually. But the form, which was the key driver of the entire exercise, was most important. And that's how you can see how it responds to the context, and it in a way mimics the terrain around it. Now, this is a photograph taken very early where you can see the tree samplings are just planted and they are about to establish then, but now it's sort of overgrown and you can't see much of the buildings. And some of you have must have visited it already. And these were some of the sketches. This is a setting within which. So if that hilly surrounding was one reference, the peculiar hill that you will see was also another reference that we have juxtaposed with this form. Like you can see that. So, sorry. Yeah. So this form is actually punctuated with these form at places. And this is how you see it from outside. If you remember the first photograph when we were looking into the site, and now this is the same, more or less same spot from where the campus is seen. These are the two towers which are like urban markers within the campus, which actually define the traversing route. Those becomes the gateways to go back and forth from the institutional areas to the residential areas. And they also help you to sort of, be used as observation towers. And for that matter, there are some punctures at the top which we had created to, because we could go up there and take some photographs. And that's how I could take that photograph, because that was a time when the drones were not in place. So we had to, create opportunities to ourselves to create photographs like the ones that you saw before. Is taken from those towers, actually, one of those towers, like this one. And some more images of the campus. Now, this is very interesting for the first year, second year students as well. And as you would have been using a term, building vocabulary, or the vocabulary of architecture. Now, how that comes in a place is very important. When you're designing a campus, you need to have uniformity in terms of its build form, because of it's a campus, it needs to have a character of its own. Now, as you see, in spite of looking at binding factor, the material as a binding factor, we looked at form and its derivations of that form as a key to creation of the built form vocabulary. And this was the genesis of the entire process. This dormitory block, which was situated on a hilly slope. So with each footprint of a dormitory block, we could negotiate 1 meter of the level difference. So we didn't want to create deliberate terracing and sort of kill the natural challenge of the site. But instead, we wanted to take that gradient into the stride of the design and respond to it cleverly, so that we can bring some interesting possibilities. So if you look at this is how the dormitory is positioned on a slope. The dormitory footprint itself takes care of 1 meter, because this is a single volume, but it has got 2 levels and got respect to storage spaces from those 2 different levels. And it still has a cross ventilation, because above the storage is all empty, and it facilitates cross ventilation and creates a larger volume inside, which brings the thermal comfort as well. I'm not talking on the solar passive characteristics of this campus, but to speak broadly, the positioning of the rectangular blocks are done east-west, so that the gable ends are facing west and east, where the maximum radiation happens, and the load-bearing walls actually protect you from that radiation, and more exposure is given on the east, south and north side, where the wind can be sort of harnessed. Now, looking at the other element, which is the connecting of these forms, so you can just keep noticing various possibilities, like 2 dormitories are connected with a flat passage, which is same as the level of the gutter, which collects water from the roof. And that connecting element remains common, and you can cut the dormitories into half and use the volume which is there for classrooms, because suddenly what happens, by cutting them into half, you expose the taller part of the volume, which facilitates to bring in more light for the classroom, and also brings in an institutional character in a relative sense. And the yellow patches which are added, which are, and you still have to repeat these build forms. Therefore, there has to be a set of shuttering, which is very peculiarly, specially designed for it. It should have a repetitive use also. So you can see there is a definite grid, rhythm of a grid, and modularity about it. So you can use those shuttering sets anywhere to build any of the buildings on the campus. So that gives you possibility of expediting the construction, and also you can open up different construction fronts, because you have a material which can be adopted for any of the buildings. So this is a laboratory which we have used the reverse curve, because the volume wasn't very important here. We wanted to create a space which will, with a good daylight, and that kind of arrangement also juxtaposed with the convex roof gave a very good punctuation to the entire build form. Now, you must have read and know, read about what Louis Kahn used to say. He used to always talk about every building has servant spaces and served spaces. There are spaces which serve the larger spaces. And taking that literally, you can see all those low height areas which are like connecting corridors are actually serving the larger spaces. So in the end of it, you will have a definite legibility to the entire composition from that understanding as well. And what you see on the left and right is small dwarf volumes which are plugged into that opened facade or open side. These are the small plugins which are like ancillary spaces which are also part of servant spaces, but they are sort of interpreted differently in order to play into the entire composition and positioned within that arrangement appropriate to the functional requirements. Like for example, these volumes on the left and right, these are like small alcoves within the laboratory, which can be used by faculty, or you can have set of computers there, or small instruments can be kept there. But essentially, it's a faculty space or a small classroom space within the laboratory there. Now, at the end of this exercise, you can see this is the entire palette of build form which is created, and which is these are all the derivatives of the same build form that we started with. And this is how the campus sort of comes together and has this synergy between its various buildings. So it's not only the materials. Here you can understand material could have been anything. It could have been brick and plaster also, but still the form would have brought them together as one cohesive set of buildings. This is the campus arrangement, which has got a service road all around. On the left-hand side, you can see the residential cluster, the traversing route coming down to the common areas. So this is the common area. One second, let me get an annotator. So this is the pathway which sort of brings people to the dining hall or from the classroom areas. Of course, there are lateral traversing routes also from the entrance. This is the entrance point. So all these are like deliberate, and this is a node where the water tanks, water towers are placed. So you actually go under them into the residential cluster or go out to the classrooms from there. So this is the institutional campus phase 1. This has got a cluster of classrooms and laboratories. And this is phase 2, which has got more classrooms than specifically designed laboratories areas. And at the end of it, you have a teacher's room, and then you have a toilet block. On the dormitory side, you have dormitories, and this is a warden's house. So this is how the entire camp. This is the dining hall with its ancillary facilities, and multi-purpose hall, which never was built. So some of these are like master plan elements, but some of them are not built. Like for example, this object was not built, and this wasn't built. A detailed part of that cluster, the way the dormitories are arranged, there's a common room, student center, and then the warden's house, which is like a studio apartment. And this is how the cluster, a typical cluster, looks like. And it has got some very intimate internal courtyards, which are shared by everyone, through which you traverse. And you here in this photograph, you can see that peculiar shaped hill, how it is sort of, helped us to sort of create a form which punctuate other convex forms. So this is a photograph. On the left-hand side is the dormitory, and the right-hand side is the warden's residence. This is the only retaining wall, and there are, say, 2 or 3 of them only, just 1 meter high, deliberately inserted to create some spaces and situations in the landscape. Otherwise, the entire grading is done by angle of repose of soil, and the gradients and all these angles that you see on the building sites are basically very natural way to stabilize the earth. And these interventions like these sort of matured into a wonderful reality where the life is established, the ecosystem is established on the campus. You can see the kids are drawn to some sound into the shadow on the right hand side of some small birds chirping there, and that wonderful flight of a bigger bird was a blessing in while I was taking that photograph. And this is what the entire experience is all about. So kids can relate to certain flowers and trees that they have planted as they travel from point A to point B. The central concourse area. Some more photographs. This is the warden. This is the principal's house actually, because of one particular location we could accommodate a level below, so we could convert that into a 1-bedroom sort of apartment for a house. This is the dormitory. This is the warden's house, and this small plug-in is their kitchenette and a toilet. This is a phase 2 cluster of classrooms and laboratories. You can see the classroom, the quality of light. You can see the area on the right-hand side, which is the student center, which is the only building which has got a mezzanine, which has got a interesting activity area at the mezzanine level. On the top, you can see the face of a classroom block, which has got more exposure and a different scale compared to the residential blocks. Now, these small plugins of the laboratory building that I was talking about create a wonderful arrangement of volumes. And mind you, these these are all load-bearing walls, and we did not use computers. These were like hand-drawn drawings at that time, and we had to commit to certain geometries right at the footing level. So this is the quality of light that you get to see from inside of the laboratory. Now this is that plugin, and the way it is seen from inside. And the passages actually take you till the doorstep of the classrooms. Alongside is the landscape strips, which actually give you company till the door of the classroom, and that's a very wonderful experience. So the same volume as that of a dormitory, when you are subjected to a very severe terrain, you convert them into an opportunity. So certain compositions or elevational patterns have actually happened because of certain responses to the site situation, and that's how this particular block of catering center has come about. This is essentially the same cross section of the dormitory, but instead of a level difference, it is a flat floor, and certainly it creates a bigger volume which is appropriate for a large flat floor gathering space. In this case, this is dining hall. So that's about the residential school. This is the night view, because the classes continue in the evening as well. Now I'll quickly move on to the precinct within the campus, which is the Center for Climate Change and Research at IITM Pune. This is the institute situated in Pashad. So we were designing a campus within the campus, as I talked about. I'll just run through the essentials because it has got certain things for senior students. about utilities and infrastructural requirements. So this was a surrounding which had hilly areas on all the sides, and there were two areas we sort of worked upon. One is that on the left-hand side, HPCC and CCCR institutional area, and on the right side is the residential cluster that we'll be looking at. Some of the routes of arrival for vehicles, some infrastructural nodes, how the power supply comes in. Now, this is a district within the city which is predominantly surrounded by, it's a district of institutes, central government-owned institute like NCL, Armament Research and Development Establishment, then IITM, a science institute across the street. So within this district actually of institutions, you are intervening, and then you are also thinking about what kind of architecture in response to the particular requirement and particular set of client and a user group you need to bring about. So we'll shortly see that as well. So we just the first challenge was to mitigate the threat of flooding, which was a recurrence every year, because there are a huge sheet of water is to flow from the hills and run through the campus, and some of the measures which were existing, which were not adequate. So we had to respond to that first and to create areas which can be sort of built upon eventually. So we these are the diagrams which indicate how there was a threat from the heavy downpour in the monsoon area flooding into the areas of campus, and how we had to divert that finally to mitigate that threat. So these are like large-scale interventions in terms of floods, like storm drain systems. Coming back to the present proper, we thought the building design of HPCC and CCCR is synthesized from 4 considerations, and that is expressing the functional duality as 2 separate yet unified blocks, integrating critical utility services from master planning to building design level, ensuring effective serviceability, converging the formal vocabulary with that of passive climate control, articulating a controlled contemporary expression in response to Pune's institutional architectural context. So these were the objectives that we had set forth. These 2 buildings came in phases which were like very sequential with a difference of 2 years. So HPCC, which is a high performance computer center, came first, and the Center for Climate Change and Research came later. But we had conceived them as one set of precinct, which is organized around a plaza, which we fondly call as a climate plaza, and the surrounding areas which are actually give access to this entire precinct from residential area or the existing institutional area. The first and foremost was the response to the climate, and with the help of understanding of the orientation, we wanted to reduce the heat gain as a very fundamental aspect of solar passive design. So therefore, we wanted to reduce exposure to the east and west side from where you normally get maximum radiation of sun. And in order to sort of reduce the heat gain, we had to derive a build form which is more rectangular and linear the way it is. And second thing was to harness the wind direction. So the orientation and I'm sorry, there are some. Okay. Orientation and configuration of build form. Wind and solar radiation, the 2 key factors that we were considering. And you can see the windrows diagram. And the strategy was to reduce the hard surfaces in order to avoid any heat island effect. So of course, the landscaping plays an important part. The unbuilt between the two buildings was deliberate because it was the organizing element of the entire proposition, that plaza around which the buildings were to come. And this is how you can see various movements are sort of overlaid. Vehicular movement, and this is a universal accessibility when you have to have accessible areas from everywhere. A handicap, should be able to sort of reach out at any point. There are multiple drop-off points from the vehicular road, but whereas within the campus you can traverse from point A to B without any impediments. So essentially, you approach from residential side, you approach from existing campus side, or you approach freshly from on the arrival on the left-hand side. So we took a position here in this project that when you're doing something in the campus like this, should there be a building with a conventional front elevation and a back elevation and side elevations like that? And we concluded no, because you can approach this pressing from any side. So any elevation can be a front elevation or a side elevation for that matter. So, but more to that, the elevations of the facades are evolved in response to the climate and the side of the or the direction to which it is sort of subjected to, and likewise its character is developed. Taking you through the space planning in order to introduce how the building is, the HPCC. There are two central arrival areas or verandas which are there in both the buildings of a different scale. And on either sides, there are office areas, and one side is a computer area. You can see HPCC foyer, seminar hall, the top diagram. Then scientists, research scholars and scientists, that's the office area for scientists and research scholars. And the left-hand side is a seminar hall. And this is on the ground floor. And likewise, you can read the diagram on the bottom of the center, CCCR as well. The first floor again has office areas on the left-hand side on the CCCR and the right-hand side of the HPCC building. But on the HPCC building, the high performance computer is placed on the first floor for safety and security, which is on the left side. And quite interestingly, I'll just go back. In response to the existing buildings, we thought, you can see the cursor. Can you see the cursor?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So this existing building was there of the library, and there was a sort of a cluster of these bottle brush trees here. So we had an opportunity to take an oblique route from here in order to approach this side. And you arrive in the central foyer, which is like a large veranda and a courtyard, from which you enter either side of it. Likewise, you continue traversing and arrive into this zone, and you can either into the office areas or to the computer side on this side. The idea to keep this area, which is largely introvert, being a computer and seminar room, because there is no one to look out, though no one needs to look out into the immediate landscape. And even if they look into the backside of an existing building, which is all right, but the work area is actually positioned in such a way that you can look into the garden created by your own. So these work areas are subjected to more better views and better cross-ventilated zones like that. So there are smaller instances like these which make that overall traversing experience and spatial planning more interesting. Like if you could see, you must have seen Johnson's glass house. It's a small house in a large plot, but he had taken an approach which is not perpendicular to the block. He had taken an approach which is at an angle to the block. And something similar happens here by virtue of the existing trees. And you approach this otherwise rectangular form in an oblique manner. And this courtyard actually comes as a surprise. And the serial vision actually gets more and more interesting as you start exploring as you move ahead. So these are the small events that we planned into the planning as well. So coming back to just running through the floor areas. The connecting areas are like common areas such as library or conference on the first floor, or the laboratory. Now, lobby and passages, the circulation course, lift and staircases. So how they are positioned at each level. So you can see the diagram is very simplistic, the spatial diagram. East and west walls are like cavity walls, and there are buffer spaces you can notice, so that the work areas or the habitable areas are further protected from these buffer areas. And the HPCC building, which is on the right-hand side of the upper diagram or the left-hand side of the lower diagram, does not have air conditioning at all. It is purely based on cross ventilation. That was the first phase. And second phase, in order to add another feature, the CCR building is sort of equipped with radiant cooling, which I'll be talking about as well. I'll just run through quickly various utility, the way they are planned. You can see all the servant spaces are being utilized by all the utilities. And the larger served areas are in the middle, the supercomputer areas. There are various areas with the different air conditioning systems. Non-air conditioned areas are the larger part. Naturally cooled areas, which is in the CCCR building. Now, air conditioned areas or the precision air conditioned areas are the computer areas, because these are like huge computing machines, which are one of the largest computers in India, which do some atmospheric study computations are connected to similar scale computers all over the world. So likewise, now these blue areas are precision air conditioned areas. Now this is a very early photograph before even they started doing landscaping. So I'll explain quickly how the CCCR radiant cooling works. The tower that you saw in the picture is actually to fetch in fresh air, and that fresh air is taken below the earth 4 meters, so that it is pre-cooled, and that pre-cooled is supplied to the office areas with help of AHU, which is placed in the basement. And then further that fresh air is pushed horizontally into the office areas. And this is the scale of intervention. I mean, you can see the human figure here. These are the pipes that you can walk through. And these are the vertical plenums which distributes horizontally the fresh air which is brought in. It's a combination of radiant cooling and underground earth tunnel, and a combined effect is designed to achieve 25 degrees of temperature when the ambient temperature is running 40 plus. And this is an atrium which sort of helps to escape the used air out into the atmosphere. So this is 100% use of fresh air into this building. So these ducts you can see hatched blue, they are the horizontal plenums which bring in the pre-cooled fresh air, and it is dumped into the work areas, and it is sort of taken out from the central atrium. The radiant cooling is, some of you may be aware, it's like putting chilled water pipes into the slab while the slabs are being poured. So the blue markings on the right-hand side, you can see all these levels are sort of placed with radiant cooling pipes. And then we had designed all these loops that you see. These are like different modules which can be switched on and switched off according to the need. So it is modular in that sense. Depending upon the occupancy, you can sort of articulate the actual usage of that system. And this is the photograph while the work was being done. And on that building, you can see these are the core areas which are actually habitable areas, and how the building envelope has come about. East and west side are the cavity walls placed at the gable ends to block solar radiation from east and west sides. Large size openings to maximize natural daylight, facilitate cross ventilation when required. Manually operable aluminum levers to adjust shading and flow of air. The RCC canopy as main shading device connected by RCC walls and columns contains the building. Roof parasols in order to create shading from the top, connecting elements, then the wind tower and the cooling tower on the upper right corner. Then of course you have to take care of winter sun and summer sun. Then the atrium, which sort of helps you to sort of cross ventilate the entire place. And this is the approach to the HPCC I was talking about. You approach it from the sides. Right hand side you can see the existing cluster of bottle brush. So HPCC building. This is how you can, the different patterns will get created because every user in that particular space can arrange the louvers as per her or his requirement in order to bring in more light or bring in more airflow. These are the gable ends. This particular side is on the west side where you can see these are largely cavity walls with lesser openings, which sort of protect the entire building from heating up. And some light shading elements on the top, other elements on the building. And that's how the entire language of architecture comes in place. This is all shutter finish concrete, stonecrete walls, metal, steel with PU coating, and aluminum sliding windows. These are not double glazed windows because you're not going to be a captive user of air conditioning, because where you can just operate this system of radiant cooling in the CCCR building only in summer days or hot days, but remaining you can just enjoy good old cross ventilation. And being in Pune, you have an added advantage of the climate, and being in the campus like this, the ambient temperatures are going to be low compared to the city temperatures anyway. So you consider all that, all the contextual offerings, either they could be sort of, benefits or challenges, but you can convert them into opportunities. The atrium space. This is a skylight which sort of does not allow, but does not, mandate use of artificial lighting much. This is the quality of daylight that you can enjoy inside. And you can see the louvers on the cabin partitions, which facilitate cross ventilation of the central area as well. Some elements on the building which sort of punctuate the entire facade and bring a character or bring a language together. Now, I think this is the last project, which is more urban context project, which is a workplace. It's the Business Bay and Ritz-Carlton Hotel at the airport road. It's a 12.5 acre site. Total built-up area was about 25 lakh square feet. All the components together. So this is the site and positioning. It's accessed by some major arterial roads coming from airport and from the city. One side is a golf course, and other side you can see institutional, and other side is low-rise residential area, which is a consolidated slum, you can see. And that's where a lot of debate and discussion can happen also. But very interesting side. All the disparities of economy are juxtaposed together, and at the flux of that interface, that the crossroads of that literally is your building, and then you have to respond to it. Golf course, corporate office complex, urban village, as I have nicely termed it, and the business bay. So this goes back 2006, the initial sketches of how the build form. Initially, I told you, I mean, there was a possibility of making a tall building or a horizontal, and we chose very consciously to explore a horizontal built-up proportions, so that it's not very intimidating when you arrive. Because the workplace, as I understand, has to be also a place which is largely seen as a landmark in the city, and particularly the hotel building needs to have a very good visibility, and becomes a very important address of a city for the kind of guests that it will sort of entertain. So it's a very complex set of requirements, and at the end of it, as a greenfield development, you have to establish something which would be sort of worthy introduction to the new age build form within the city. Some of the initial sketches, and so you can see it goes back to May 2006, and then some formal, more organized studies of the build form. The idea was to subdue the building bulk of the offices, which otherwise could have been a huge tower, by putting it horizontally, and then that becomes eventually the backdrop for the hotel, which is on the left-hand side. And the hotel being on the road front, we wanted to push in most of the office areas back into the site, so that the hotel is not intimidated by the scale of the office areas. And finally, a hotel gets to enjoy its a very important position in people's mind. So essentially, the central courtyard, which is a 4-acre terrace garden on top of a parking area, organizes buildings around it. It's a very simplistic diagram in the sense of organization of entire campus, but it is accessed by 2 different roads, and the interface with the city becomes a very important aspect while designing a project of this scale. How vehicles are going to arrive from which direction, and you're dealing with like peak hour, rush hour, influx of vehicles, and exit of vehicles at the same time, the different time of the day. But when it meets the city traffic, we need to carefully plan the interface between the city roads and the campus roads, and also to take care of the pedestrians as well as two-wheeler traffic. So here we could segregate not only pedestrians, but two-wheelers also do not sort of conflict with cars, so to say, as you within the campus. So it's an exercise at multiple levels. You are dealing with urban design situations where the traffic and transportation of the immediate present is very important, and how to integrate the public transport drop-off with that of your arrival areas. So it's very interesting, although complex, but it's very interesting. And that's where I realized my sort of understanding of urban planning came very handy while designing an urban design project like this. Now, if you remember, I talked about the ghats of why. So you can sort of bring that analogy here, and you can see that this is the stone wall at the bottom, which is, you can sort of relate to the stone wall on the riverfront. So here I sort of metaphor is that, the river, which is a very positive thing. But here in the city, the street, if you just sort of replace it in the position of a river, which actually brings in a lot of flood of traffic. And that is the threat that you have to mitigate. And at a fast movement character of that traversing city, intra-city traversing, actually you don't have much to look into your own campus. So you can actually, afford to have your own campus perched up onto the podium. And that is how that idea of, the fragile elements. So this entire podium is built in stone, whereas all the delicate elements such as glass and metal are sort of perched up above that area. And that is how, the interpretation happened. The same time, the urban village, which is sort of your immediate neighbors, you don't want to create high-end retail areas as a shopfront onto the street side and sort of, consolidate on that disparity even further. So we wanted to sort of create a very silent phase and not to bring in that dialogue at all, because the end users across the streets are completely different and diversified. So we didn't want to bring in that friction, the visual friction. But at the same time, a large workplace like this has a lot of its workforce coming in from these areas as well. So that's a positive part of the whole intervention. Now, looking at the campus as such, the podium level plan, which was designed as a high-end retail area, surrounding the open garden, which is about 4 acres. And there is also part of a hotel, which will also be connected to this level, which will have some banqueting, second level banqueting facilities and specialty restaurants at this level. So this is the business bay, and this is what you can relate to the image that I was talking about from Y. Now this is all stone wall, and now these images. This is a ramp. It's a fire engine ramp which takes you to the podium, and this is an old photograph of the podium. The construction of landscape elements was happening. The landscaping of this part was done by a very famous landscape architect from Lebanon called, his name is Vladimir Durovic, and he has been very sought after landscape architect, and we were quite lucky to sort of have him on board to work on this campus. So it was an interesting experience, and he responded wonderfully to the overall language of building mass and the language of its landscape interventions, as you can see from here. So I was telling him about the stories about why and the flooding and the whole idea about the entire campus, because that was our first meeting when we wanted to explain the overall concept of this place. And he sort of took that idea, secretly with him and converted that. So he actually liked this idea about ghats where, during floods, the ghats get submerged, the steps get submerged, and after the water recedes, it is again exposed again. So actually that idea he converted into this, and then this is the landscape that he has designed, which is supposed to flood in monsoon. And when the rains go away, I mean, this is going to come back to this. And that was the idea that he sort of, presented with, and it was appreciated instantly. And it sort of related to the story that I was sort of building, which was more of a analogy that I was bringing in, but he sort of captured that into reality in different sense. So these are actual site photographs. Some F&B pavilions. Now this is the green forest which has come about on the campus podium. drop-off areas, the entrance lobbies to the office towers. This is a mosaic of glass. Now, this was a new thing when we designed it. Now you can see many buildings with this idea, where you wanted to sort of optimize the heat gain factor, because there's a very interesting dilemma that we have gone through, having worked on stone buildings and having to work on glass building, for a popular notion of corporate world that glass buildings depict international image. But in our context, I mean, we tried and failed to convince clients to have a second skin. But we actually tried to balance it out by using fretted glasses in order to reduce the heat gain, and which was quite successful as well. The technology is there of glass to sort of mitigate that heat challenge, but we, at the core of our values, as you can see from some other projects, we would definitely have loved to have some shading elements on the glass. This is the hotel block of that campus. These are some initial study sketches of the design, and how that entire mass can be broken down into more palatable or more acceptable form, which can sort of complement the office blocks as well. So this is the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, which is one of the Marriott brands, as seen from the golf course. For this particular project, we did the landscaping as well. So this is the pool deck. This is the actual photograph, which is designed by our office. Along with architecture, we did landscape architecture for the Ritz-Carlton component of this project. Yes. So
thank you, sir. That was a very informative and interesting presentation. We got to learn so much more. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. We're now open to questions from our audience, and people joining us from the Facebook live stream can just post their questions there and we'll pick it up for you. I also request everyone asking questions to also keep your cameras on.
Hello, good evening, sir. I am Riya Oswal from second year. Actually, I'm from Y2. So my question, yes, sir. So my question for you was, I wanted to know how did this place, you being from Y, help with your concept of designing in the natural setting, as well as help you create your own design vocabulary?
See, there are bits and pieces that you glean from your experiences of particularly, say, why. I have seen many buildings as while going to the school and coming back from the school, which were being built by hand, by masons, by carpenters, and you could see progressively how those components are made and how those components are put together. And those are the processes which sort of remain in your mind, and you understand instantly how things are made. Although you may not have that skill set yourself, but you know the process because you have seen it literally on a daily basis. Likewise, there was a set of houses near my school there, from which I used to pass every day. So from the sequence of its sort of trade, near to the river, there was a potter's house. Families of potters used to stay because they were in need of a lot of water and a lot of open area to dry their artifacts. Then there was a weaver which used to use the central court, central area of that small village there. Songirwadi, if you know, from Brahmansha, if you cross, and that's the way to go to Dravid High School. On that road, you will see all these places. And then next to the school, there's a carpenter. So you're seeing various objects are being built, a bullock cart being built. Somebody is making, using metal to create buckets and things. So all these processes actually are, very good learning medium to deal with various crafts or, technology which is prevalent in that time.
Yes, thank you, sir. It was really helpful. Yeah. And the route you explained, I know it very well because I stay in Brahmansar.
Oh,
so
good.
It was very helpful. Thank you, sir.
Yes, next time you can observe things with an added point of view.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
Good evening, sir. I'm Sahil Dighi from second year, and I wanted to say that when we look at the design of the heritage school, like it has a very striking use of stone and using vernacular building materials. It can even be a appropriate climate response measure, but there are times when it becomes an issue, like using vernacular materials. It becomes an issue when we are using it in dynamic forms, and it is like mostly used as a cladding for that reason, like in case of stone as well. So could you please tell us if you have faced any similar issue while working with stone, and how we as students can explore this material further?
See, stone is a wonderful material to work with, and is going to be available in all regions of India, because India as a country is blessed with, because it's geological history. You have wonderful array of stones, with maybe from volcanic rocks, or there could be sedimentary rocks. But traditionally also you have seen the stone as being a very predominant material for, particularly for institutional buildings, which will bring a lot of it has life to it also, and it ages well. It requires very less maintenance. So the core value to deal with a particular material has to be of your own. I mean, we believe in using all the possible uh, properties of a stone. For that matter, if it's a stone, it can certainly carry weight. So if it is deployed as a load-bearing material, it is then we consider it's being used appropriately. And but it is possible to some extent, depends on the cost parameters, timelines, and everything. But nonetheless, it will offer that quality of endurance to the elements, and irrespective of whether you use it as a cladding material or as a load bearing material. So you'll have to be very flexible and not get sort of tied up into only the traditional ways, because the technology can offer you more possibilities as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So, I actually had a question regarding the Zostel Panchgani's project. So, in a country like ours, which actually the use of shipping containers as a building material in a tropical and humid country like ours, it comes with its own sets of challenges, and especially rusting in case of the metal containers. So the treatment, the proper insulation of the surfaces also costs would be very costly. So how are you like exactly able to tackle these problems while designing for Zoster?
Uh, uh, See, that notion about materials for, I mean, container is a universal object, because it travels in all climates and all geographies of the world, and probably the worst ever elements on the sea. And the container steel is a Corten steel, which is it's a different steel which is designed to sustain the high seas. So it has already sort of endured that abuse of climate, and but of course it's not used as a container for human habitation. but it certainly gives an opportunity to upcycle it and reuse it, which is in a way very green sort of consideration. And then there are simple ways to sort of do it, insulate it from inside, and it's not irrespective of any climate. For that matter, we were also invited by Sonam Wangchuk to design container hostels in Ladakh for one of its institutes, and we have designed a building for them. Uh, I mean, whatever layering you have to do for thermal comfort has to be designed accordingly, and it can be still useful. The fun part of that object is that it is modular, and all architects love to use modular things and play with it, and everybody sort of likes to do something using containers. And this was a wonderful opportunity, and Anuva has sort of converted that opportunity into a wonderful design eventually. So I don't think there should be any limitations. Like we are imposing too many limitations being in India. But the future has arrived here also, and it's because of the technology, access to technology, which is as good as anywhere in the world. You can have capabilities to convert any challenges, to sort of mitigate those challenges into better possibilities. So I think as student, you should not limit yourself to, I mean, yes, of course, traditional wisdom can help you to create certain type of dialect, but then there is a future also, and there is a whole other possibilities with use advent of new materials. So I think as students, all of you should be very open to those ideas and think creatively. I mean, so yes, challenges are a good opportunity to respond differently, and that's how each design can become different.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Hello, sir. I'm Aishi. So I'm from the third year actually, and I think our batch was one of the fortunate ones to visit your structures in our Pune study tour. And I actually wanted to talk about like the Rohan farmhouse. It's honestly one of my favorite structures. And having been there, like when we see it in plan, that in interior spaces and even the volumes that are formed because of the angles used is like wonderful to experience. And when you look at the angles that you've used, you talked about how you've done that, taking in account the views in the site context. And we also noticed how in spaces like the washrooms, to screen the area but still provided views, the angles are used for that as well. And I wanted to ask, like when we deal with such forms, such angular forms, how do we account for the geometry of it, like while designing? Apart from the site context factors, have you what other factors did you look at to direct or govern those angular geometries?
See, I get to your question is more to how to deal with the angular geometry, and you just stay on that. See, it's very important to understand that you should not have a preconceived notion about adopting a geometry. It should, if it comes as a part of an evolution of your thinking process, and certain solutions can be provided by deviating from the orthogonal geometry, then that is your choice. In certain case, the kind of design response you want to bring in may come by using a circular form or maybe angular form. So one should understand that first. Normally what happens, at least in the student phase, you tend to adopt a form right in the beginning and try to fit things into it. But it should happen, because any geometry is your choice, because there are so many possibilities in a geometry. Why should you? Why one should limit oneself to a particular geometry, for that matter, a circular angle? Let it be a way to find a solution. So in this case, in Roman retreat case, as I showed you some of the diagrams, when you have the views all around, and when you have that reality, how to capture it from each room becomes the exercise. Now, to have a circular thing and still you can have a view, that's one thing. But in order to sort of, delineate particular space to particular function, you need to, position or exercise that choice, which view should be given to, let's say, living room, which is the most important room, or which view can be sort of given to others, bedrooms and things like that. But so what happens is that, like, you are thinking about a fan shape possibility, and that actually gets consolidated. And as I showed you, the real inspiration was my third year design to the of the entrance gate to the park. So that was a small module which became a room in itself. So each room was designed as such to have that picture frame enlarged by bringing that roof up. And while when you bring the roof up at an angle, you're actually exposing to the elements even more, and invite a lot of challenges of heavy rain and lot of sun into that. But then you have to balance that out also. So you sort of take out projections progressively and create shading elements. And that's how it sort of happened, because we didn't want to lose that opportunity of capturing view. Or on the other side, that was the only choice that we had, because we had view on the west and southwest side. So certain challenges give you that opportunity, and that how you convert into another possibility is what I was discussing earlier as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, so my name is Suji Jain. I am from Pune. I'm a second year student, and I had a question. Like, in your presentation, you mentioned that there should be an unbuilt space for every built space, and that we should be very conscious about this space. So, like, in an urban context like Pune, where there's so much population, how do you manage these spaces, like these formal and informal spaces within the structure?
See, this is a very good way of looking at how, see, at a city scale, this already happens. And, all the public spaces, all the open spaces are the unbuilt spaces, which are like consciously kept so. So I look at it as a conscious design decision by city planners. And likewise, you should continue to, keep that approach. Wherever you have to build, say, X amount of build, it has to have certain percentage of unbuilt, which has to be consciously intervened. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, and that's been the way. Otherwise, also, like, traditionally, I mean, because of our climate is such that people have been, we've been using planning around courtyards, or if not around courtyards, you would always have open space attached to your residences. But in the urban context, it's not possible to exercise those principles end to end, because you are living in a completely different built objects. But at the same time, we are still talking about how to bring green into the vertical, and there are so many experiments everywhere and getting popular day by day to intervene sort of green areas at different levels of particularly the office areas. So there could be ways you can also come up with eventually how residences can have their own courtyards at different levels, and how that can add value, and they can still be profit-making interventions, because in the developer-driven economy, you have to sort of come up with brilliant ideas to convince how it can be monetized also, and when that happens, that can be maintained as well.
Yes, sir.
Yes, so there are challenges, but you should not limit yourself being a student to come up with ideas. If you are given all the freedom, how you would do that? That is the question. But it's very important is to understand the need of it in the first place.
Yes, sir, that's true. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So we also visited your heritage project in our first year trip, and we were really intrigued by how those spaces were connected visually. These individual structures were connected visually with themselves as well as the nature. So right now in our third year project, we're dealing with the campus design, which is a highway facing on a urban contour site. So we just wanted to have your views on how do we create such spaces which will be connected to the nature and at the same time cozy to the students for learning as well.
This is a very generalized question, although you are referring in back of your mind a specific site that you are dealing with.
Yeah.
But if I have to use the same, conventional way of interpreting things of SWOT analysis and things, essentially you have to sort of understand if the highway is posing any challenges to you in terms of its sight or the noise in particular. But the highway also gives you an opportunity to view your creation, by the larger audience as they are going past that road. So if that is the kind of a situation, you have to be also mindful of that, because that looking at a good building is always a pleasure, whether you have to do anything with it or not. So in a city, when you see a good building, of course you can't do every building, but if you get to see a good building, you feel nice about it because it's adding value to your city. Likewise, highway may have certain challenges, but it brings a very good accessibility and visibility to the project. But if noise is a particular challenge, then there are ways to sort of mitigate that also. So you can still create an introvert space with facing impermeable elements of the campus towards the highway side, just to mitigate noise. I'm just assuming. But whether to address the view side or you create your own opportunities of looking inwards are the choices that you can explore. So, isn't it? So you can create your own environment within. It's not that because in Rohan retreat, I mean, although it was based on capturing the horizons, and where when we did it, the horizons had grazing cattle and flying birds. But now, if you go, the horizon is littered with a lot of industrial buildings. So when you go there, the story is not as poetic as it was when we started that. So one has to be mindful about the context in the sense that you'll have to also look into the future and see what can happen around it. You also.
Yes.
I enjoyed the design strategies, design decisions of every project that you took. And it is such a nourishing experience. Very simple, articulate, and decision-making processes. You also worked as landscape architect. So it is wonderful, just to learn from you by looking at your projects. Once the cloud of COVID goes, I think we want you to come to our college.
I will
whenever it is possible.
Yes, I'll definitely like to come. So that will definitely do a session the way you would like to have, or get involved in the studio some way if you want. We can do whatever best possible. Yeah, that's not a problem. So in fact, when the pandemic started, I was I was telling many colleges here, because that is the time student had difficulty having interaction with the faculty at large. And I was actually, helping some of the students as a pro bono. I mean, nothing, formal commitment, but for thesis, because there are so many students want to just have a conversation, and they have wonderful ideas, or they are stuck at a point, and then they just want to sort of discuss that and move forward. So it's very important to have that interaction, if not physically, but at least sometime. So definitely, whenever the chance is there, I'll be sort of happy to contribute.
Yeah, that's very nice of you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. We really enjoyed your presentation, and we really hope that once offline college starts, we can invite you once again and even visit your project.
Sure. Yeah, look forward.
Yes, sir. Any concluding notes from you, Mishra, sir?
I think let Mishra sir conclude, because I have said what I had to say.
Yeah, no. Yes, sir. My concluding remarks would be, for thanking not only for your time and your wonderful projects that we shared and listened to, but also a thriving learning process for last 2 hours. I could not do anything else. I could not move away from the screen, because every time you showed projects, there was something to learn from in every project. And since I have seen some of the projects, the interest only grew. So I'm sure the first year and second year students who are here must have really enjoyed it. But thank you, sir, and for your time. And I look forward to future interaction physically as soon as the COVID cloud gets away. And whenever I am in Pune, I will personally come to thank you, sir, to your office.
No, you need not thank you. I mean, it will be my pleasure to sort of have you at my office, and we can, have wonderful interactions together.
Yes.
So please let me know, and we can meet definitely. And it's my open invitation to all students to drop in with some intimation, so that we meet. And then we can sort of, at least, if not go to the project, we can spend some time together.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Definitely.
Yeah, sir.
But my only condition is that come up with a lot of questions.
Yes. Yes. I think we can end today's Manan session here.
Yeah. So thank you for being patient with me. I think it stretched too long, and with some interruptions from my side, because of I didn't realize.
No worries, sir. No worries.
Yeah. So all the best to all of you. Take care.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye. Thanks.